Hello, my beautiful, wonderful children. I don't know why that became my intro, but it is now, and we're sticking with it. Today, we are going to be going through and ranking different fantasy tier map lists. I didn't phrase that right, but you know what I mean. And I'm very excited to get this one. I've been asked to do it quite a bit, and it should be a lot of fun. I didn't work on the lighting before I started recording, so I'm going to be cloaked in shadow a little bit for this. And y'all just have to deal with that. But you know how this works. I really don't need to go over it again. I'm going to put the best maps in S tier, the worst in D, and we're just going to fill it in between. It's not complicated. I feel the need to go over it each time, but I really shouldn't. But let's go ahead and kick this off. I also didn't label these maps here, so I hope I remember what each one is and call it by the correct name. That'd be embarrassing if I didn't. Let's go on through. First up, we have the map from Inheritance Cycle. It's a pretty good looking map. It's standard, it's a West Coast, which there's so many West Coast fantasy maps. It has, you know, water, mountains, forest. Nothing really jumps out to me about this one. It looks like a lot of others, but it's not bad. It's just not highly original. Inheritance Cycle, I'm feeling a solid, let's just say it's in the C. It's not bad, but there's nothing about it that's going to jump out to me, and it doesn't really tell me anything about the story or set a tone. Really anything that a fantasy map should do. It certainly isn't jumping off the page to me. I do want to point out that you should be ignoring the artistic interpretation of the map here. I'm basically just going off the physical look, ignoring the artist's flair, because what I want to do here is see how much the map has originality to it, and how much the actual structure of the land can help tell the story, immerse you in all of that, etc., etc. I don't think the talent of the artist should really be taken into account here. But moving on from Inheritance, which is a fine map, but it's just a fine map, we're going to go ahead and go for the Tower of Babel. This one was sent to me by Stephen Keller. I hope I'm saying your name right. I've said your name several times in the channel, and I hope it's right. This I love, because it has the city around it, the different layers. This tells a story in itself. Your imagination immediately begins to wander, and I enjoy it quite a bit. We are doing country and city maps, which is a little weird to be doing them side by side, but I can't really justify doing that in two different separate videos. But this one I'm going to go easy B tier. Definitely fits in right there. Enjoy it substantially. And this, you know, it pulls from history. It has its own flair to it. Tower of Babel, good. I enjoy that one. Next up, we have the Kingkiller map. It's not just a West Coast map. Thank you, Kingkiller. I appreciate that. Well, it is kind of a West Coast, but it's not like just, you know what I mean, the bulge, the typical bulge, though it is definitely a West Coast. Can we just get an East Coast fantasy map? Or even like a South or North, for the love of God. Just everyone trying to be Middle-earth in some way. Alright, so Kingkiller is a good map. It has a good amount of depth to it. Not a lot jumps out to me that's like geographically impossible, which is a problem with some fantasy maps. Definitely has a European flair to it, which is nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Having a twisted Europe is very common, and I'm not gonna blame Kingkiller for that at all. And I will go ahead and say this is probably another B tier for me. Don't absolutely love it, but there's nothing wrong with it. You know, Patrick Rothfuss has a nice little fantasy map there. That is perfectly acceptable to enjoy. It's just not doing a whole lot that I haven't seen before, really, in a fantasy map. Is this one of them? Yeah, okay, so this one is from King's Wild, a book I have not read. Yes, I am ranking fantasy maps from stories I've not read. And you know what I can say here? There's not a western coast in sight. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that a weird amount as someone who's like weirdly obsessed with fantasy maps. It's just nice to know that we're not going to be doing this forever. But this one's nice. I like the Middle-earth influences are there for sure in the artistic style here, but I'm not going to try to take that into account. We have a whole lot of forest land, which sets this apart from a lot of other fantasy maps we see where, you know, you'll see just not that much intense detail put to some huge epic forest, which I'm now is immediately making me wonder, is that like integral to the story? Is this a part of it? Maybe. Good mountain ranges, some definite geographical, that seems to not be how things should be, especially up in this area. But I'm not hating it overall. I like it. It looks good. It has a weird structure to it that I'm oddly satisfied by. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this one, yeah. You know what? I'm feeling nice. Let's go B tier as well. That's good. I enjoyed that. Now we have the Lightbringer map. This one, if you've read Lightbringer, it's highly Mediterranean influenced, and Brent Weeks seems to be trying to... It's like a stripped-down minimal Mediterranean look to it, but it's definitely there. You have your capital in an island, which I really enjoy. That's different. Most of the time, the capital city is just on a coast, or it's, you know, it's not necessarily on an island self-contained itself. So that I do like. Different geographical landscapes come through clearly with the colors. Nicely done overall. I don't know, I'm having a hard time ignoring like the artistic interpretation of the geography. That's really hard to do. I don't necessarily like the art style in this one, to be perfectly honest. I'd like to have the more defined mountains and trees, but moving on. Ignoring that, I do like the structure of this quite a bit, and if you've read Lightbringer, the travel is a big deal in this, because, you know, if you're over here and you got to get down there, that sucks. And characters struggle with that. There's ways to maneuver around that, invented things along those lines. It's really great. So for me, Lightbringer, ignoring the artistic style and just going off geography of this, I'm actually feeling A tier, because it's not a West Coast. Not a West Coast. And it's got different geography to it, and it's pretty original. It's not just another Middle-earth retelling like the inheritance cycle seems to be here. Next up, we have Earthsea, which I'm excited to see here. And this is the first one that's going with an island hopping kind of vibe, and I love island hopping vibes. If you want to make me happy, you have an island hop setting. And I'm definitely going to go ahead and put Earthsea in A tier, because having an island hop setting like that just makes me feel like whimsical and wondered, like, oh, there's so many different cultures and lands that are going to be trapped in these different dislocated places. How's the travel between them going to go? Especially with a series that has so much mythical creatures and aspects to it. Perfect. More island maps. I like island maps. I'm biased for islands. I'm bought by Big Island. Next up, we have a Luthadel map. For those of you unaware, this is from Mistborn, and it's a good city map. I really like the big sweeping bridges here, the main causeways dividing into smaller streets, districts clearly defined. This looks like a fairly realistic city. I mean, if you look at a map of ancient Rome, you see things like this popping up, or even just medieval cities like medieval London, especially with harbor. The harbor was clearly defined, which is great. A nice capital in the middle. Everything here looks pretty well done, and that's the way Brandon's going to do it, especially with all aspects of his fantasy series. He doesn't cheap out. So in terms of a city map, this is definitely the best city map on the list, I believe. Not that there's many, and I'm going to go ahead and say this is S tier right here. I really like Luthadel's map. Solid. Now we have the World of Malazan. I did have to really dig to find like a World of Malazan map that actually has like any artistic application to it. A lot of them are just bone dry. So this one has a good amount of artistic flair to it. Beautiful islands here. Well, most of these aren't. Some of these are continents. I think you would define them because they're so large. But there's smaller islands spattered in as well. This, to me, is the first map I've come across here that feels like a full world. And that just makes sense with Malazan. But a lot of fantasy series have this trend where there's the discovered known world and then the unknown lands, and who knows how much the unknown lands make up. It's not really defined. I think a lot of fantasy authors do that because they just, you know, that's accurate for the time. Back in medieval times, we didn't know the whole world, so that same is continued forward. Malazan seems to not have that here, and that makes sense because we jump around so much in this series from nation to nation, culture to culture. But Malazan, I love this. I think it's not a whole lot of geographical impossibilities, literally none showing up here that pop out to me immediately. Granted, I am watching on a dimmed screen, but solid. All the way through solid. I'm stuck between A and S, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and jump it into S tier, because I mainly out of respect for having a whole world, and it be justified within the text of your story. Well done. Fan of that. Roshar, another full world one, which again is rare for fantasy maps. This one really tells a story within just how the map looks again. You know, if you've read the Stormlight Archive, I haven't confirmed this by looking anywhere, but I have a theory that Roshar was perfectly meant to look like a storm cloud because of, if you've read Stormlight Archive, duh. And it's divided nicely. There's a few geographical kind of, that doesn't make complete sense in my mind, things here, but with what we know about what's happening in the atmosphere there and the extreme weather that's very alien to Earth, I can just kind of forgive it. Although I don't find Roshar to actually be an S tier without any qualms, because while it is beautiful and I can excuse a lot of things, I just don't think it's quite up to par with a lot of others. With that being said, though, it's definitely an A tier. No way I'm going to not put that in the A tier. Next up, we have Midworld from Dark Tower. If you want, okay, this is like a prime, hold up. Telling a story in the map is important to me. Telling me things about your world, giving me an impression of some kind. And Midworld is perfectly designed to just look like it's barrowing towards a target, because that's what it is. If you've read Dark Tower, there's a target that is trying to be reached, and the journey through Midworld to get to that target without getting into spoilers is just this incredible quest that spans so many books. So I love the look of this. That being said, there's actually several maps, but this is one of those maps, so I'm not sure where it came from. I don't know if it's specifically from within the text, because I have weird copies of some of these books, and none of them have maps, unfortunately. Actually, I haven't checked the one that was given to me by... I need to check that one. But this is a great map. I really like the way it looks. Overall, it's beautiful. No geographical complete impossibilities here, except for a couple things that are kind of odd, but I can excuse them again because of just, it helps build the structure of the story and the world, and that's fine. So for me, Midworld is going to be an A tier. Definitely like that. It's not a West Coast, thank God. It's kind of just a middle peninsula, or maybe peninsula. What would you call that? I don't know. Well, we don't see the bottom or top, so I don't know what's going on there exactly. But I enjoy it. It's great. Moving on. We have the world from Mistborn, a West Coast. So points off for originality there, I guess. I want to know if that's a conscious or subconscious influence. If you are a fantasy author out there, did you consciously think like West Coast? Because that's fantasy. It's what we got to do. But this falls into a lot more typical fantasy stuff here. This is a nice map. There's other, artistic takes on it. I just really like this one. It's got, mountain ranges that kind of make sense, although mountains on the coast like that isn't the most common thing. There's a few just oddities, but it's simple. Like, I can't discredit this one anyway, and I like how much of the story comes through here, because it almost feels like you're walled in by mountains and the people are trapped here. That makes sense as well. I think it's giving a very intentional vibe with that, although I've been known to read way too much into maps before, but I'm not feeling anything exceptional about it, so I'm going to go ahead and just drop it into B here, and that's okay. Now we have what I was asked to do that I would never have done in a million years, and this is why I'm glad I did the Twitter poll. Someone asked me to do the map from Wizard of Oz, and that is great. Thank you for asking me to do that. This one, complete fantasy nonsense, and it's beautiful for it. It's just a wild, chaotic thing. I don't know if this is canon or official, I just know I like it. It's just absurd, and that's great. It doesn't need to be anything besides that, and that's knowing the text of the story. We're going to go into another example of that later on. That being said, in terms of like actual what you can read into it map or anything like that, and that's basically what I'm like trying to actually do here. It's got almost nothing. So I'm just going to drop that in C and feel a little bit bad about it. Sorry for Wizard of Oz diehards out there. It's just what I've got to do. Now we have Skyrim. This, again, I would not have done, but someone suggested it, and I was like, why not? We're doing fantasy maps. It's absolutely a fantasy map. The Skyrim map is great. One, North Coast. Appreciate you, dog. It's definitely part of a larger world that we are aware of if you play more of the Oblivion games, and I enjoy this one. Nothing here jumps out of me as completely impossible. It's well structured. It just makes sense. It's rather simple, but it doesn't need to be anything fancy, and the only thing that really kind of hampers it is the proximity of certain cities, but that's, again, just a video game mechanic, so I can't fault it for that. Size doesn't entirely make sense. The fact that you can jog from one city to the next in a span of a couple hours, the economy there would be wild. But I'm not gonna fault it for that. That's fine, and I'll throw it in B as well. It's hard to really mess up a fantasy map to the point we're gonna be in D tier. But wait, we might get there. No, we won't. Next up is Wheel of Time. Again, West Coast map. There's some geographical oddities here, but with mild spoiler warning for the the Wheel of Time, the breaking of the world happening, it kind of just makes sense. There has been an outside influence on this world to shape its geography, so having some oddities is completely acceptable and fine, including just a random mountain in the middle of nothing, but it was made for a reason, so that's allowed. We have basically Alaska. You can't argue with me that this is basically Alaska. It really is, but there's a few things that don't make complete sense if you look at it with a 100% critical eye, but it's fine. It's not the most original. It's really the utilization within the story of the nations and things that make Wheel of Time's story work so well. There's not much from the map itself you can pull from the story unless you really know the lore first. But I think it's a perfectly good fantasy map. I don't think it's the best ever, though. I know there's some Wheel of Time fans are going to hate me for that, but I'll drop it in A because I do think it does suffer from originality, but it does all those typical fantasy tropes just fine. So we got an A-lister for me for there. Now we have another city map coming through from Gentlemen Bastards, and that's the Comore. Scott Lynch made a very cool fantasy map here with the water running through the city. It's this canal-filled city, this grimy, nasty city this story takes place in, and I love it. Again, in terms of artistic take, not much going on here at all. But it's still a beautiful concept. I like the idea. It's totally original in my mind to have the main story, the main focus be in this city that has waterways throughout it. Something we see in the real world, but in terms of fantasy genre, I haven't seen much before. And it adds to the story. This is something that actually affects the story directly, so I like that. I like everything about the Comore. I wish we had a beautiful artist take. We don't have that yet. But I'm going to go ahead and say this, for me, in terms of concept, is going to be an S tier, mainly because of originality. Dig that, and I like how much it plays into the story as well. Because if I had a beautiful artistic rendition of that where I saw clearly it's a city with waterways weaving in between it, I'd be so down. Like right away off that alone, I'd want to see what's going on. Now we have Westeros. Westeros is one of the most clear, like, the author likes Europe maps out there, but he does a really good job with it. There's some oddities as well, geographically. I'm going to keep saying that, but it's just true. But overall, I like it quite a bit. You have your clear, this is England station, and then there's the twisted rest of the world. It does make me want to see more of the world. It's not a full world map. There's some stuff that doesn't make complete sense, but I'm fine with it. I can just, it's a fantasy world, let's get over it. There's magic here, and I can't really fault it for anything. It's not the most original, it's not the most crazy, but especially with the north, and if you look closely, there's a lot of nice little Easter eggs in there. I'm very confident to go ahead and put Westeros in the A tier. That's a good map. Next up, we have Granddaddy, Middle-earth. No question, the most influential map created for fiction. Middle-earth has just set the standard and changed everything. That's why half these maps here are clear homages or rip-offs, however you want to view them, to Middle-earth, without a doubt. And it's arguably never been topped. I mean, it's so beautifully done. There's so much detail and nuance. It's just awesome. And everything there within the lore is explained or makes sense to some degree. So you're an asshole if you don't like Middle-earth. I'm just going to put that out there, at least from a geographical standpoint and appreciation for what it's inspired. And then next up, this is a very positive list today. Next up, we have another S tier because it's Discworld. And I've gotten a bit further in Discworld. I forget how many books I've read now. I have them on audiobook and I just keep pushing through one after the other. And I love them now. And this map, you know how I feel about absurdism. Absurdism is a beautiful thing. And having your world be on a turtle's back, it's just, yes. Everything about this is a gigantic win and a yes. It's bold, it's brash, and it's creative. Again, you're a jerk if you don't like Discworld's map. But this is my random ramblings and rankings of some fantasy maps here. This wasn't the most diverse set of topics I could talk about for a fantasy map list, because it's kind of just like, what's the geography like? Is it original? Is it another goddamn West Coast? But, I just have to go off my gut reaction to them, and I abide by this quite a bit. Let me know what your favorite fantasy maps are in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon, Fabio. Fontana. I love your name for so many reasons, man, and I hope you're having a great day. I'm having a good one.